All right. We return. The recent deal, if you want to call it that, with Iran is very troubling indeed. Saudi Arabia has just come out and indicated that they will and are willing to strike out on their own, as is Israel. What I found the most amazing about this is, first of all, we find out only yesterday or the day before that the United States and Iran have been conducting negotiations in secret for some time now, over almost a year or over a year. That was withheld from America because they didn't want us to know, and they didn't want the American people to scuttle this deal like they did the war in Syria. And so all of these things that operate in secret, the TTP, the TPP, the TTIP, all of these international treaties and agreements are all negotiated in secret now, completely unbeknownst to America and, in fact, your representatives in Congress. That's a dangerous trend because what it tells us is that we've got a dictator, and I don't mean specifically just Obama, the entire administration, who are out there working deals that we're beholden to but have no input and no say in. And that is not a good place for Americans. When we talk about this issue with Iran and this nuclear deal, there are many in the United States who are saying that this is a deal that offers and bears no benefit to us. Saudi Arabia has now come out and warned that they're going to strike out on their own, as has Israel. And interestingly enough, the Saudis and Israel are actually joining forces because they both have a vested interest in keeping Iran from becoming a nuclear power. The agreement that was negotiated allows Iran to continue to manufacture and produce the one thing that we cannot allow them to have. The real problem here is that when we have accepted Iran as a nuclear power, we have lost. We did that with North Korea, and look where that has brought us over the decades. In other words, when we are sitting here and we're acknowledging and accepting that Iran is now a nuclear power, it changes the entire balance of power. It changed the balance of power on the continent in Asia, and it's going to change the balance of power in the Middle East. I did a show about a week ago, maybe 10 days ago, about how Saudi Arabia has already, for all intents and purposes, already bought a nuclear weapon force. They haven't accepted delivery yet. They bought it from Pakistan. And there's plenty of supporting documentation out there because essentially here's what's happened. The Saudis, knowing that at some point in time Iran was likely to end up with nuclear weapons, they've already built the infrastructure domestically for them to be able to handle nuclear weapons. They've already got the missiles. They've already got the silos. They bought the missiles. The only things they're missing is the screw-on warheads. I mean, it's like you going out and saying, I'm going to buy a bow and arrows, but I'm not going to buy any of the broadheads that I can use for hunting. And saying, well, I don't have any broadheads, so these arrows can't possibly be dangerous. Knowing that you've purchased them, you've just got them waiting some other place for you to go pick up and install them when you need them. That's essentially where we are. And at this point in time, the Saudis are deeply concerned. They have been silent in reference to this agreement, and yet they are all meeting collectively together, and they're discussing openly with Israel the options for how they can operate and act independently and strike out on their own against Iran outside of the United Nations, the United States, Russia, and any of the other countries that have been negotiating for all intents and purposes with their enemy on their behalf, but not consulting them. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're claiming that they were kept in the dark by the Western allies over the Iranian nuclear deal. Well, you know, that's kind of like the idea that you allow someone else to negotiate on your behalf with someone dangerous who lives next door to you, but doesn't involve you in any of the negotiations, and then comes and says, so we've got a plan here. We're going to allow him to keep firearms in the house. We're going to allow him to continue to keep the C4 the explosives that he's already manufactured. He's just promising not to make any more. And you say, whoa, wait a minute. You can't allow him to keep that C4. It's dangerous. Well, in this case, he promises not to use it. I mean, that's insane. Your house is at risk because you live right next door. The people who negotiated the deal live on the other side of town, and it's no risk to them at all. How absurd. How absurd. The truth of the matter is, this deal was not good for America. Frankly, it's a very complex issue. And I can't sit here and say that I am competent to understand all of the intricacies involved in it. I can't say that I am. What I can tell you is that in the case that we're looking at right now, there had to be a better way than acquiescing to Iran's demands. I mean, Iran has come right out and said, we won. We get to continue enrichment. We have a fundamental entitlement to enrichment. Now, John Kerry comes out and says, we won. They have no fundamental entitlement to enrichment. Wow. So you're telling me that this is an agreement that was negotiated between two parties. Both come up to the microphone after the signing of the deal, and they both have completely diametrically opposed views of the agreement that they just collectively signed. One says we can have enrichment. The other says you can't. Either the agreement outlines that they can or they cannot, but they can't be both that wrong. They can't both view that agreement and be so far apart about its real true implications. I mean, I get it that they both of them want to please their own back end. You know, the Iranian people want to go home and say, look, bingo, we did it. Kerry wants to come back to the United States and say, peace in our time, and I'm responsible for it. You know what bothers me the most about this whole thing, by the way? You notice how Kerry, when you see him in photographs, or in video talking about this, the guy looks like the Cheshire Cat. He is more interested in his own personal legacy, I think, than he is in actually whether or not what he's doing is good for the world at large. And that bothers me, that these people who are, so embedded and so deeply entrenched in power are really not necessarily worried about what's good for the world or what's good for the country. They're more interested in being able to say, I did it. I'm responsible for that. Yep, it's me, baby, and you really owe me. I find that shameful. What's more important is I find that dangerous, because these people aren't really interested in what's good for America. They're interested in what the history books are going to say about them. I don't see the benefit to that. I really don't. In this case, the Saudis are going to do something with Israel here. And the problem, of course, with that is that if they are forced to take action on their own, does that mean that the world is now going to turn on them and look at them as the aggressors in this case? I mean, the Middle Eastern press is all over Netanyahu like white on rice, tearing him apart for failing as a leader to allow this thing to, because it's happened under his watch. The Iranians are going home and saying, see, they've accepted our fundamental right to enrichment. I got to tell you, and let's just take a look at this enrichment thing for a moment. The reason they say they want enrichment is for peaceful nuclear power. Well, to be honest with you, there's a whole problem with that whole topic. I mean, we just saw a meltdown of Fukushima in Japan. And who's to say that if these guys were to build a nuclear power plant, that they would do it in a safe way? I mean, let's put aside for a moment the issue of nuclear power being misused. Let's just talk about what its actual real intended purpose is under peaceful scenarios. The real reason they want this is because they say they want to be able to build a nuclear power plant. Well, I have to tell you, we don't know enough about how to create a nuclear power plant safely that we should really be allowing Iran to build one. And the reason I say that is because an accident like happened in Fukushima and could happen in Iran, if the implications are global. I mean, look what's going on in Fukushima right now. We've got after the tsunami, there is a junk pile that is the size of entire states. I'm talking about like the size of Nevada, that is sweeping across the Pacific, and it's slowly approaching the United States western coast. It's radioactive. They have no way that they have been able to contain the nuclear reaction. They're about to actually try to pull the fuel rods out of the disaster of what's left of Fukushima. We're all on pins and needles as to what's going to happen with that, because if they make one mistake, they will expose the planet to massive amounts of radiation. We are already getting radiation as the natural course of weather patterns move west to east. The implications of this are staggering. And we don't really even know the long-term ramifications of what will come about as a result of Fukushima, nor, frankly, is our media and our government being honest with us about the true implications and the true dangers of Fukushima. I mean, that's just a reality, people. They're keeping a lid on the whole thing because they don't want Americans to be terrified of nuclear power. I don't think that we as a collective species, mankind, is smart enough to play the split the atom game. I don't think we know enough about it, and I don't think we have the resources or the knowledge on how to contain it when it gets out of control. And that's the problem. I mean, we figured out how to make a weapon out of it, but we haven't figured out how to use it safely for our own benefit as an energy source. And that's the problem. Even if Iran has purely, let's assume for argument's sake that this is all just government nonsense, right? That this is all just warmongering and talk, and really Iran only just wants to build nuclear power plants. I don't think Iran is capable, technologically speaking, of building a safe nuclear power plant. I don't think anybody is. It's not just Iran. I don't think anybody is capable of that. And I got to tell you, to a certain extent, there's some argument to be made to the point that Iran is sitting on vast deposits of oil. I mean, equivalent to what Saudi Arabia has. So why would they want to undercut their own retail product? I mean, that doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. It would be like Michael Dell deciding to market a product that doesn't require computers to offer computing. I mean, why would he do that? It means he's never going to sell another computer again. The whole argument is kind of nonsensical. But even if we want to believe that Iran's true nuclear motivations are on how to build, nuclear power, we are assuming that they actually know what they're doing. And I don't think they do. I think they will cut safeguards. I think they will cut corners to get it implemented because there's political hay to be made to be able to say, see, we told you, we really didn't want nuclear weapons. And the truth of the matter is that once they've gotten to that point, the idea of creating nuclear weapons is a cinch. At best, this agreement, which lasts only 6 months, is already stated to be fraught with problems in the sense that how do we verify? The Saudis are mad. And if the Saudis are angry at the United States, remember that they're the holders in the petrodollar agreement partner. What is the petrodollar agreement? Basically, it's that we have committed that we will protect them and protect their monarchies in exchange for them requiring that all transactions occur in U.S. dollar-denominated currency. So no matter who you are, if you want to buy oil from the OPEC nations, you've got to transfer and convert your currency from whatever it was, whether it's rubles or reals or whatever it is, to, or euros for that matter, to the U.S. dollar. And that props up our currency. But if these guys have reached a point where they say the United States is no longer really honoring the petrodollar agreement, and they decide to break it and start accepting any other currency, including what the BRICS countries want to create as the world's currency, in open defiance against the U.S. dollar reserve, we're sunk. Not only are we sunk, but the whole world is sunk. There just aren't... Look, if the United States dollar is unseated as the world's reserve currency, it will bring our economic system to a collapse. Inflation will run so rampant here in the United States that the prices will change from the time you get in the door to the time you actually get up to the counter to buy that loaf of bread. That will, of course, ensue a secondary financial collapse that will have ripple effects globally, including to China, because in a large part, they are benefiting from manipulating their currency to force Chinese goods to be cheap here in the United States. You'll see the end of cheap Chinese goods as soon as they have unseated the United States dollar as their reserve currency and instituted the yuan. Because then all of these electronic gadgets that we buy that are so cheap will not be cheap any longer. They'll be in the king's seat, and they will make the decisions about what products are going to cost. And the problem is that America has become so dependent on consumerism for our entire economic output that with or without a change in the reserve currency, our situation will decline precipitously. We will fall into, for all intents and purposes, an inflation-driven whirlwind, a tornado of inflation-driven collapse. My biggest problem here is that I think that the people who are out there cutting the deals on our behalf are bunglers. They're inept. They're doing it for all the wrong reasons. They're interested in their own personal view and how their legacy is going to be treated instead of actually worrying about whether or not it's the right thing for them to do. I got to tell you, I'm not confident that this is really in our best interest in any way, shape, or form. I know that over the course of the next 6 months, and when we're talking about the Iranians' ability to develop, I keep hearing these people saying, well, this stalls their ability to, it extends by months, their ability to race to the nuclear edge and say, okay, we've got a bomb. I got to tell you, if we're down to months anyway, where do you think this is going to go? I mean, it doesn't really, it doesn't really bode well that we've allowed Iran to get to the point where they are literally months away from creating a nuclear weapon. And now at this point, what we're trying to do is stall the clock from the 12 o'clock midnight hour to the 12:01 hour. I mean, it's ridiculous. Decades of ineptitude have allowed it to get to this point. And the truth is, at some point in time, the entire world is going to have to pay for this. A nuclear Iran is a danger to the region, and it's a danger to the world, even if it's for peaceful purposes, because I don't think any nuclear power can be built safely. I don't really know where this will end up. I know I'll be watching it carefully and closely, and you should be too. But the truth of the matter is that no matter how it works, this is going to be a dangerous position for us. The one thing I think that we can look at is going to come out of this is that by allowing Iran to sign this deal, we're going to see lower oil prices on a global scale. And that should help gasoline pricing here in the United States. But who knows? I mean, I could be completely wrong on that. I do know that oil prices, since the deal was announced, have slid. That doesn't mean that it's going to be a permanent solution or a permanent state of affairs. I do know that when we have the Iranians going back and coming out on camera and saying to the world, we have retained our ability and our entitled right to produce, create, and enrich. And then we've got John Kerry coming out on the other side saying, see, this agreement blocks them from enrichment. We've got a fundamental problem. Somehow or other, these two parties of the same agreement walked away with completely different ideas about the point of the agreement. And that tells me there is no agreement. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to America's Voice Now. When we come back, we're going to talk about how the FBI is doing the dirty work for the NSA domestically. There's a lot of new information out about how the NSA has been making these statements under investigations from the House and the Senate about how they're really not spying on Americans. It's only international. Well, the truth of the matter is, legally they may be able to say that. But what they're not telling you is just as important as what they are telling you. There's an article out this morning in Foreign Policy, it actually came out over the weekend, about how there's an obscure FBI unit that does all the domestic surveillance that the NSA is barred and prohibited from doing, and that's how they're getting away with it. And, of course, the concern there is that the NSA is saying in public hearings, listen, we're not doing all these things you're saying we're doing. Well, that may be true. But nobody's saying, okay, well then, who is? Turns out it's really the FBI, and they do have purview here domestically in the United States. We're going to talk about that because I think this is a news story that nobody's really talking about, and it should really be forefront in our minds. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm the host here. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll talk about that aspect of it. And if you'd like to make a call into the program, you're welcome to do that. If you're a listener and you want to give a shout in here, you can. The telephone number is 417-204-5141. That's 417-204-5141. You're welcome to call in and have your input on this. You can also reach me via email at mike@americasvoicenow.org, and I'd like your feedback and input on these programs. If you think they're good, if you think they're bad, if you've got a bone to pick, by all means, give me a call or shoot me an email on it. We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now.